company in this regiment.
Each trooper will learn this operation by heart.
Tonight, we're gonna have to cross the river.
These crowds are gonna catch some hell.
And welcome to the fourth episode in this series of a detailed breakdown and discussion of the show Band of Brothers. Now, tonight is a bit unusual because we are going to be talking about and breaking down the episode 4 that never was. And we'll get into why it never was in a little bit. But let me bring in two of my regular co-hosts. First of all, representing the United States of America, it's Blue Collar Loser.
Figured, this is a great shirt. The Goonies. We all like the Goonies. Come on.
I love the T-shirt. Welcome to this hungover edition of Bank Holiday Special. And to our viewers, we're sorry we had to move the stream from yesterday due to personal reasons. And unfortunately, that's made up for a different panel than we had originally in mind. But hey, we're here. We're doing it now. So, we're going to get into it in just a bit. But let me bring in my next guest, a man who worked on the show, was there throughout, the Inside Man.
Hello, good evening.
How are you, sir?
Yeah, I'm very well. Yeah, good to be here again, and really looking forward to this one, to be honest. So, yeah, it's quite intriguing.
It's largely thanks to your associates that we can't show it, unfortunately, because we don't want to get sued, but we have all been able to read a copy of the original episode 4, which was called Personal Effects, and I'm going to go through the story in some detail in just a second, and then we're going to all offer our thoughts on it. We would love to hear your thoughts as well, and then we'll be bringing in a couple of extra guests to hear their thoughts towards the end, including our ex-army buddy Lord Toxic and possibly one or two others. So first of all, can we just get a bit, before I do the breakdown of this episode, as you understand it, can we just have a bit of history? It's written by Graham Yost, so I just have to say it's a superb piece of writing, so pundits to him before we even start.
Yeah.
But Inside Man, could you just give us a bit of the history of how this episode evolved, at what point it changed during production, and then obviously we ended up with replacements, which was the
it appears that the episode 4 was kind of in the air. It was, there were a few sort of balls sort of up in the air at the same time, and nobody really know which particular direction to go for this episode, because it's kind of a transitional episode. It's an episode where we do get introduced to an awful lot more of Easy Company's newer members of Easy Company, hence the replacements title for the actual episode 4.
Yeah.
But this is kind of this is one of those that could have been the episode, and it genuinely could have been the episode, and slotted in very, very well, I thought. But yeah, there are some things that I want to say, but I think it's best that I leave those until the end, because
Sure.
I think we might be kind of on the same page, as it were, regarding the reasons why it never actually made it. But
yes, indeed. Well, okay. Well, I'm going to do a quick breakdown. If there's anything in particular you want to shout out as I do that, just jump in. But what I'll try and do is get through it as quickly as I can. And for those people watching, thanks for tuning in. Do me a favor, and if you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe. And if you could do me an extra special favor, if you could do a little post on your social media about the stream with the link to the stream, I'd really appreciate it. Remember, this episode has never been discussed in a public forum before, at least not as far as I'm aware. I
No, it's
certainly
never been
haven't seen.
discussed. No,
No,
no.
so you're hearing it here first, and it'll be interesting to see and hear people's reactions in the chat to this story. So we do want to hear those views towards the end. Okay, so basically, this episode 4, Personal Effects, has a pre-title sequence. The scene that comes before the main titles for the show, which usually in some episodes consisted of veterans talking rather than a scene. But here it's a scene, and it's the Graves Registration Unit in the Zon Cemetery, which is actually still there, where a number of the 101st are buried. And German soldiers are digging some graves under guard. There's a character called Jenkins, who is with the Graves Registration Unit. And we get a close-up of some teeth being cleaned on a body that's being prepared for burial. The body has no dog tags, has taken a grenade to the back. We don't see the body or the face in its entirety. And it's been recovered from the town of Noonan, east of Eindhoven. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, Noonan.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Which, of course, in the episode Replacements, you'll know, if you've seen that episode, that there's a bit of a firefight there. So we know the body's been recovered from the battle that we haven't yet seen. And sort of the drop before the titles is, yeah, we've got to identify this member of Easy Company. You don't realize that this person is from Easy Company. So it sort of sets up that this might be the body of someone you've already met. You know, this might be one of your characters that you've started to get to know might have been killed. I quite like that idea. So we cut to credits, and then we're back into the show, and we're on the road to Vagel. And for anyone who doesn't know, these towns were all various objectives during Operation Market Garden, which was the next biggest airborne operation after D-Day in Holland. It's depicted in the film Bridge Too Far, which I'm sure most people have seen. If you haven't, why not? It's on YouTube. It's free. You should definitely watch it. So we have a group of guys walking and talking. These include the following characters: Webster, Hubler, Heffron, Talbot, Wynn, Toy, and Raider, who's a character that I can't remember from other episodes, but I certainly know the rest. Webster gets a lot of dialogue in this episode. He gets a huge amount of dialogue in this episode, including a couple of really quite big speeches, and I'll come back to that. It's established in this conversation that Webster went to Harvard, and he's a bit of an intellectual in the group. Not something that we've learned about him up until this point. In fact, up to this point in the show, we've barely really seen him. I think he might have had 1 or 2 lines, but that's it. The trucks stop, so the company are in trucks. Everyone's ordered out. They're informed that the Germans have cut the highway between Vagel and Uden, known as Hell's Highway by some soldiers. Lieutenant Owen turns up, and Owen is going to be a fairly main character in this episode. Again, it's not someone we've met before. He's from the Grave Registration Unit, and he's looking for Easy Company in the convoy. So he finds a group of them held up by a wall, where one of them, Private Rice, is digging a hole. Webster, Raider, and Hubler are with him. Hubler, sorry. And Hubler says, I like this little conversation. For Christ's sake, Rice, we stop anywhere for more than a minute and you start digging. Laugh all you want, Hoob, but when the Krauts drop an 88 in this here backyard, I'll be the one who's having a giggle. Also in this conversation, there's another dig at the British. Fucking Montgomery. Hold open 50 miles of 2-lane blacktop in the middle of enemy territory. Brilliant.
I will just say, in a historical context, and this is purely in my opinion, I think the criticism of Montgomery has always been pretty spot on in terms of, I don't know, I always thought that it was quite sort of an egotistical person.
Well, I think also he should have personally been on the ground and galvanised the operation. Once the operation began, he was nowhere to be seen, was he?
No. May I just wanted to quickly mention something about the pre-title sequence, which I actually thought was quite moving. I thought it was done it was written very respectfully, and in the hands of the correct director, this would have been really quite a special introduction to one of the episodes. I think it really would have been quite exceptional, quite moving.
Well, I mean, I'll come on to my thoughts on the story when I get to the end, but yeah, I agree. So Spears, Owen, and Malarkey are in the next scene. They arrive into the conversation, and they're discussing. Have we any idea who we're missing? Because the Lieutenant Owen has said, he informs them he's trying to identify a body. He believes the body is one of the soldiers from Easy Company, and they're trying to establish who's missing from the company. And the soldier doesn't have any dog tags. And at this point, somebody says, "I hear Rounderman is missing," as in Bull Rounderman, who in the actual Replacements episode nearly gets run down by a tank. We'll come back to that. Owen then asks what happened at Noonan. And then some of the soldiers start cussing Lieutenant Peacock. Now, this is interesting because Lieutenant Peacock heavily features in this episode, and that really sets up his departure from the show in the, I think it's the Bastogne episode, where he gets to go home. And all the soldiers are quite pleased because he's not a great leader. Yeah. But he's got so much meat in this episode. So we have the first flashback to the Battle of Noonan. Malarkey's on the back of a tank. The next thing he knows, he's in a ditch. And Buck Compton's been shot in the arse. So that sequence is actually in episode 4, more or less. Slightly different interpretation. Compton, Toy, and Malarkey then evacuate Buck on the back of the door. That scene is also in Replacements. Lipton says, "You got one bullet and you got 4 holes. It's almost a miracle." Brilliant line. We cut back to the present. Malarkey informs Lieutenant Owen that's all he saw of Noonan. He wished he knew what happened to Rounderman, but once the firing started, he lost sight of him. So there's a belief at the minute that Rounderman might be the casualty. That's quite clever because we've met Rounderman already. We know who he is. So the possibility that one of the main characters we've met might be dead is, I think, is quite a good way of toying with.
Yeah, and concealing the identity of the dead soldier is a very, very good idea. You know, it gives us that sort of mystery. You know that.
It's almost a bit of a detective episode in it, sort of.
Yeah.
No, it's not a Columbo episode. People don't panic. But so then we cut. Somebody calls Webster over again. Just going to put a shot of Webster up on the screen for anyone who's not sure who he is. And this is actually a shot from the actual episode 4 Replacements, played by the actor Eon Bailey. And this episode, really, there are 3 people that get the meat of the dialogue in this episode, and Webster is one of them. And I happen to think Eon Bailey is a fantastic actor. I really liked him in the show. Yeah. Kind of like a young Timothy Bottoms. Don't you think?
Yeah.
Really, really like him. So Webster says he might have seen. Webster says that Sergeant Martin, who played by Dexter Fletcher, must have seen Rounderman get killed. And the second flashback to Noonan is with Webster in Noonan, and he gives a hand grenade to an old Dutch man who runs off with it. And then we have the scene with Martin and the British tank where he's saying, "Put a round through the house and you'll see the tank real good." Of course, the British guy doesn't comply. That scene did really happen. And again, that's also in the episode 4 that we got, so that you have the British tank getting destroyed. But you don't see as much of that battle scene at that point. So Peacock then arrives on the scene. Owen explains he's with the 605 Graves Registration Unit. Webster says, "I told him about Rounderman." Peacock says, "You told him what about Rounderman?" That he's their guy, as in the body. And Peacock says, "Well, you might want to check that out with Rounderman himself. I just spoke to him on the radio. He's walking up from Zon." So at this point, we now know that Rounderman is actually alive. Owen expresses his doubts, but Peacock says that the body probably belongs to Van Klinken. And Van Klinken actually is in the show and is in this episode. But Owen expresses doubts. And this is the bit in the episode I really love. And this is the nub of the story of this episode, because Peacock's quite dismissive. And he's like, you know, "I'm sure it's Van Klinken." And Owen says to him, "Do you know what a GR1 form is?" Peacock's very arrogant. "Should I?" Grave registration form number 1. It's where we put down the deceased name, rank, serial number, and cause of death. Now, when I turn in a GR1 through the magic of military bureaucracy, whatever I put on the form becomes transformed into the telegram that goes to the mother, father, or wife of whoever I name, and it's put on line 1. So the way I work is, and I hope you don't mind, sir, is before I go ruining some family's day, I like to make 100% goddamn sure that whoever I name and whatever name I put on line 1 of a GR1 is the right name. So humor me, would you? I love that little speech because it just, you know, it tells you how important that is. No one wants to get a letter telling them that their son is dead when actually they're not. And I'm sure that happened.
Yeah, I'm sure it did.
Yeah. So good to see Sassy Sasquatch in the chat.
Hey.
Popped into your show last night, dropped you a message. I don't know if you saw it.
Hit her one-year anniversary.
So Peacock orders Webster to sweep out the house that he's going to be sleeping in. So again, this kind of sets up Peacock as that kind of arrogant, slightly annoying officer who's more concerned with where he's going to be sleeping and his quarters than he's really concerned about his men. So then we have our third flashback, which is Peacock and the squad in Noonan, and this is him talking to Owen, saying this is why it's Robert Van Klinken. There's a gap in the hedge, and Christensen is in this episode, is in this sequence. So is Muck and Picalla and Bray. And this sequence was briefly in Replacements, where there's a gap in the hedge, a couple of guys get through, then the third person to go through, who is Van Klinken in episode 4, gets riddled with machine gun fire because the Germans wait for the next person to come through. They often did that. Peacock then says, I sent Rounderman to join Martin in the ditch for a look-see. Van Klinken goes through the hedge, he gets shot and he drops. Owen says you couldn't get him out, and Peacock informs him standing orders were in Holland to leave the dead. Besides, 2 tanks had been hit and it was getting real ugly, so I got my men the hell out of there. Anything else? And Owen produces a cross, a little crucifix at this point. And Peacock laughs, but he asks if it's Van Klinken's, because that's the only personal effect that they recovered from the body that was different. Peacock doesn't confirm. He tells the story of Peacock then basically talks about Van Klinken in a negative sense, and that's quite interesting because apart from the David Schwimmer character in episode 1, there's very few scenes, if any, where one person in the group really slags off another soldier.
Yeah. I think the only other time that we see that is Lieutenant Dyke, isn't it?
Yeah, Dyke. Yeah, Foxhole Norman.
yeah.
But this is, this is an officer slagging off one of his soldiers, and so we got another flashback. Tells the story of Van Klinken laughing at the girls in Holland when Eindhoven's been liberated at getting their heads shaved, and we now cut to that scene with the girls getting their heads shaved.
Yeah,
I don't know if you've got an image of that, Chris, but we could pop that up. And if you slept with a German soldier, you got kicked out of town. So Peacock says, you got your man. It's Van Klinken. Peacock exits, but Webster then speaks to Owen before he leaves. And he sort of offers a counter argument and says that the reason that Peacock hates Van Klinken so much is because he trained at Toccoa. Peacock missed the Toccoa training and he missed Normandy. So I guess that makes him feel small compared to these guys. So he hates them. So that's his sort of, and then you've got that scene, which I think is in episode 4, where Webster tells the story of Peacock jumping from the plane. So this is flashback number 4. On the plane, he's with Talbot and Webster, and he says to Talbot, push me when the light comes on out the door.
Yeah.
Because he's worried he might not jump. I think that scene is in.
Yeah, that's in the, yes, it is. It is. He says that when they're just about to, I think it's just after we see Sobel, when Sobel first arrives, and sort of intercepts sort of the motorcycle off the back of the truck,
right?
Falls over Malarkey, and you see that little scene play out where he says, when the light goes on, please, push me, just push me.
Then Webster says, he offers a different point of view on Van Klinken's death. He said, "I'm surprised to hear the body's Van Klinken because I heard he actually made it to an aid station. So he believes Van Klinken might still be alive." Owen says, "Well, the wound on the body is a grenade to the back, not around to the chest. So he doesn't believe it's Van Klinken anyway, who took rounds to the chest when he was going through the hedge." With a great line here in the script, and I have to say the dialogue in this script is really on point. "Why didn't you tell Peacock?" Owen says, "I was afraid his head would explode." Because the guy's got so much kind of like pent up tension.
Yeah.
Then Webster remembers Van Klinken gave the cross to someone. Now, Van Klinken is a real soldier of the 101st Easy Company. He was in the Battle of Noonan, and he was killed. And here's a link for information about him if you guys would like to read about him. So Webster says, "I can't remember his name, but he was a replacement. He joined E Company this summer. I have this distinct memory of Klinken giving him that cross, but I just can't remember his name." Talbot then comes over and says, "You mean Miller? That was him, Miller." And then we get flashback 5, getting ready to jump into Holland for Market Garden. Webster claims he saw Klinken give Miller the cross as they're waiting to board the plane. Liebgott then comes on and says, you got that wrong. You saw me and Hashi exchanging a switchblade, and then we cut back to that scene again and we see it replayed out, but it's a switchblade being exchanged between two different characters. Webster stands corrected. Now he remembers he saw Miller and Klinken in a different place right after Sink's briefing. So now we flashback number 6. We cut to Market Garden briefing, and then Webster sees the cross exchange during the briefing. That's when the Market Garden briefing scene happens, which is also in Replacements. Then cut back to the orchard and farmhouse, which is where this group of Easy Company are resting up. Easy Company are not all together at this point. They've been separated into 2 groups. Heffron then comes along and says, "Which Miller are you talking about?" Because there's James Miller and there's William Miller. Heffron describes the Millers and how Van Klinken, who was a veteran, took them under his wing a bit and sort of tried to kind of look after them. So there's a bit of a debate over which Miller it might be that got the cross. Webster tells Owen that Klinken gave his cross to the taller Miller. So it's a tall person. Talbot then asks, has anybody seen either Miller since Noonan? But no one has. So, and then Liebgott makes an interesting statement. He says, "Anyone remember him before Noonan?" And no one says anything. He says, "Of course not, because he's a replacement. Sorry, but it's true. I don't know their names." And that sort of ties into that yardstick of difference between the replacements and the old boys who, they don't socialize with them so much because they're worried that they're going to get killed. Randleman arrives with the line, "I hear you've been telling everyone I'm dead." And then we have a flashback to Randleman's story at that point. He tells the guys in the group about getting stranded in the barn, the Dutch girl killing the German. Again, that whole sequence is actually in episode 4. Then at this point, Talbot asks Rounderman if he saw any KIAs. He introduces him to Lieutenant Owen from the Graves unit. Lutz asks who wants the radio, and they put a radio call through to Winters. Winters is located further up the road in Uden, and we cut to a scene in the church tower. This is very Bridge Too Far, where Nixon and Winters are up in the church tower. The radio man's just below them, and they're trying to sort of survey the battle. Call comes through on the radio, and just as they're about to answer the radio man, because they're being told they're looking for a few lost men, 88 start opening fire. The church comes under fire from sniper fire. We cut back to the orchard and the farm with the rest of the group. Everyone has to take cover. Of course, the private who dug the hole is kind of laughing because he's got a hole to go into. And while under fire, Owen actually clutches the crucifix. So there's a fair bit of artillery going around. Webster's hoping a round is going to land on Lieutenant Peacock's head. And then we cut to a bit later and they're cooking a stew, which is basically British rations that they're all complaining about. Hubler taunts Webster for not coming out of his foxhole. The night orders are not to use the radio because it attracts too much attention to the Krauts. It's now raining, so Lieutenant Owen is forced to stay with the group overnight. And now we have a massive scene between Webster and Lieutenant Owen, where Webster has a big speech about the psychology of flying over London and it now looking all so normal, as if war in the UK has kind of ceased to be, and he's looking down and wondering what everybody's doing and seeing them going about their normal lives. He talks about the operation. He says the biggest problem we had before we got to Noonan was that we couldn't get to the bridge before it blew up. And we cut to the Zon Bridge. This is flashback number 8. Winters and Nix are doing their Bobby Stout number from a bridge too far. They're leading Easy Company towards the bridge. Now, here's the thing. Was it Easy Company that were assigned the objective of capturing Zon Bridge? Of the 101st.
It is mentioned in the book Band of Brothers. So
yeah, I didn't have time to check it for tonight. Somebody in the chat might know. I mean, I'm assuming it must be the case that it was one of their assignments. So it was actually written in the script, guys. The original script, you would have seen the Zon Bridge getting blown up again, just like in Bridge Too Far. And I suspect one of the reasons that scene was cut, not just to do with the storyline, is people said, we've already seen that scene in the Bridge Too Far. And it's quite expensive to blow a big bridge up. Perhaps we should, do something. I suspect that's why that big got cut. So Owen says no one got killed, and he said, well, apart from Lieutenant Brewer, who got shot. Now then we cut to flashback number 9, and it's Lieutenant Brewer outside Eindhoven town, not outside Noonan, as actually in the Replacements episode. And he's looking into Eindhoven town before they go into the town, before the civilians all come out. And you have that celebration, and they link up with 30 Corps, and that's when he gets shot and wounded by the sniper. So Webster says only 3 people wounded in the company in the first 2 days, no one killed. Add to that, the Dutch people were happy to see us. Cut to Eindhoven liberation sequence, and that sequence, of course, is in Replacements. Webster narrates that entire sequence with quite a big speech, and everyone thought the Kraut spirit was broken. There was a kind of false sense of security. So we then have flashback 11, and they start arriving in Noonan. As in Replacements, and Webster mentions Vincent van Gogh was born in Noonan. I can't remember if he says that line in the actual episode. Not sure if
it rings a bell. It does ring a bell, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I've got to watch it for next week. I haven't seen it in at least all 4 months. What happens then is basically Hubler's asking who is Vincent van Gogh. Or Van Gogh, sorry, you pronounce it, I think. And then they have German half track, and that scene again is in Replacements. They see a half track. We cut back to the orchard. Lieutenant Webster asks Owen at that point what his story is. So we don't see any more of the Noonan battle that's about to unfold at that time. He asks him how he ended up in Graves registration. Was it something he signed up for? We now cut back to flashback number 12. A lot of flashbacks in this episode. It's on a train. He's just finished basic training. This is Lieutenant Owen, this new character we've never met before. He was part of the training at Toccoa. Webster didn't realize they had grave units training there. Owen makes this comment, we're pretty invisible. Then there's a flashback to a scene when they're clearing the bodies of the beach on D-Day. And they're trying to clear the bodies of the first wave before the second wave lands. I didn't even know there was a unit assigned to do that. That's nuts. Because that's like... I mean, at that point, the beach wasn't even secure, So then Webster asks him, what's the hardest part of being in the Graves registration unit? Lieutenant Owen says, trying to get a body out of a tank, if there's anything left of them.
Yeah, it's pretty... this little piece is actually pretty telling and quite horrific, I think.
Yeah.
This piece of dialogue, I think.
Well, he for those people listening, he comments that often he has to collect up the body parts and put them in a mess tin because that's all
with
that's
the spoons.
With
them from the insides with a spoon.
Yeah. We flash back to Normandy after a tank battle's taken place. Flashback number 13. And Owen is basically Lieutenant Owen is on a burned tank. He's trying to get the dogs to come off because they're trying to eat the bodies. And Owen has a big speech about this sequence. It's quite moving. He stopped believing in God, and then says when it all comes down to it, we're all just meat, which is quite sort of hitting, Fade to black. We're now on the next day. It's the roadblock outside Uden. 2 Cromwells are blocking the road. It's foggy. The Easy Company men come out of the fog. Garnea and Malarkey are there, and it's the two separate units of Easy Company that have got split up during this whole sequence are now united. One of them says, we were sure that with the shelling you guys got, we were sure you were gone. And the other's like, we thought you were overrun. Lipton and Peacock have a little scene. Webster introduces Lieutenant Owen to Winters. Winters and Nixon are hardly in this script at all. They've got about 4 or 5 lines, which I don't think is a problem. Owen and Jenkins, who speaks a little German, go to Noonan and they meet with a priest there. And the priest, because they were told the priest has information, the priest has 3 sets of dog tags that he's hidden in a box. And this is another flashback because Webster says they're looking to identify a body, and Nixon says who, and they said, well, we've narrowed it down to 3 people: Robert Van Klinken, James Miller, or William Miller. And we cut to the flashback with the priest and the dog tags, and then Nixon in voiceover says they're KIA. Owen says which one? Nixon says all of them. So all 3 men are dead. We then cut to another flashback where Christiansen, this is the role played by, oh my God, A-list actor.
Michael Fassbender.
Michael Fassbender, thank you, Inside Man. Michael Fassbender had loads of dialogue in this episode, like a good sort of 15 lines. So again, and he doesn't have much dialogue in Band of Brothers. But he had a lot in this episode.
Yeah.
Probably I think he's probably the 3rd character that's got the most dialogue. He basically talks about Van Klinken like he was a friend. They wanted to retrieve the body, but the fire was too heavy. But then Longo, this medic, just ran out in front of all the fire and got the body and brought him back. And the Germans didn't fire at him, presumably because he was a medic. We then cut back to flashback 14. Longo gets Van Klinken to the aid station, but despite working on him, he dies. Christiansen then tells Peacock's version of the story and basically said it was bollocks. Peacock didn't get us out of there. He didn't actually have the faintest idea what to do. He panicked. Christiansen took control of the men and got the men to pull back. And then with flashback 15, we go back to Newen again. And in that sequence, we see William Miller get killed. And I think William Miller is James McAvoy, is he not, in this episode? He's one of the Millers.
Yeah.
Because very young James McAvoy is actually in the Replacements episode. So that sequence with Miller getting killed again, there's McAvoy on the left there. There he is. That happens in this scene. So we cut back to Noonan constantly. It's like 7 or 8 times. Then, so we're nearly there. Sorry, I know this is long-winded, but it's good to tell you everything that happens in this script. So we cut to Lieutenant Owen talking to Garnea. Garnea recounts James Miller being killed. Sorry, McAvoy plays James Miller, I think. And we see that scene with James Miller getting killed. We cut to Lieutenant Owen filling out the form that he talked about earlier. There are 3 cardboard boxes with personal effects, each labelled with the men's names on them. Owen opens one of the boxes of William Miller and he finds a letter. This letter is then read out as a voiceover, which presumably by the actor that plays Miller, William Miller, that is, which recounts his friendship with James Miller and Van Klinken. And he's writing home to his wife. And he's talking about how Van Klinken has looked after them and the 3 of them have become close friends.
I have to say, when reading this, I genuinely was actually quite moved. I was quite choked up. As I was reading this,
I teared up.
It's incredibly moving. It really is. It's such a gut punch. That personal thing.
Because also he's talking about the friendship with 2 people, and we know all 3 of them are dead by this point. So the letter ends abruptly when we cut back to Noonan, and we realise that at the point where they said German half-track, just as they're entering Noonan, is the point where William Miller stopped writing the letter. So he never finished it. He was writing it as they were going in to the town. We cut back to the present. Owen folds up the letter. We cut to Son Cemetery. The graves of Miller and Klinken are side by side. The priest is There, Colonel Sink is there. He talks of the failure of Market Garden with the priest. Priest asks, how will it be for the 101st? Can the boys get any rest at all? No, we've got to keep the road open. Then we cut to a battle sequence. Various privates firing HMGs, including Muck and Pinkella, firing a mortar, burned out tanks. Winters calling, fall back, fall back. We cut back to the cemetery. Father Maloney says, whose box did you put the crucifix in? Lieutenant Owen says, Van Klinken. I think the others would have wanted it that way because it turns out he gave the crucifix to both of the Millers at different times for luck. They have a conversation about faith, and Lieutenant Owen says his faith is empty. We cut to south of Vagel. Easy Company have regrouped in the trees on the edge of the field. There are 2 tanks that are in the forest. They suddenly realize that German artillery is zeroed in on them. Webster looks at the tanks burning, and Webster says to Hubler, a spoon and a cup. And Hubler's like, huh? Webster says, the guy said, you need a spoon and a cup. Oh, never mind. They watch the tanks burn. Fade to black, end of the episode. So that is the breakdown for the original episode 4. The central characters in that episode would have been Webster, who gets, I would say, the meat of the dialogue, who's on screen now on the right. Lieutenant Owen, and I'm guessing that the actor probably would have been cast for this part, but then would have found out that I don't know if they got
I would say so. I would say that they had, but there were things that were subject to quite considerable change.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure he would have got paid something because he would have had to have been unavailable for other work.
Yeah, probably a pay or play deal.
Yeah,
something like that. You know,
it would be interesting to know which actor that was because it's Lieutenant Owen is probably the second biggest part in this episode. And then Christensen has substantially more to do in this episode, and we get nice rounding out dialogue of lots of other characters, including Garnier, Hubler. Lieutenant Peacock gets a lot of dialogue. We get to see why the men don't like him. That's not really set up properly because of that being cut out. We don't really get to see much of Peacock's failings, and I guess they probably thought they didn't need that because they showed another lieutenant failing in the episode after Bastogne, when they go into Foy, which of course we'll talk about when we get to that. So that's enough of me talking for the moment. Inside Man, tell me your thoughts, as you're the one who brought this to our attention.
Well, I mean, on reading it, it's just such a pity that it was never made. It could have been an additional episode. It could have been after episode 4. This could have been an episode 5, and we, having used a lot of episode 4 for context. It could have been a midpoint episode. But remember, this was originally written as a 13-episode miniseries. It was never intended to be 10 episodes. It was originally a 13-episode miniseries.
That's interesting. So 3 episodes got cut effectively.
Yeah. And if you look at some of the numbers of the scripts, the episode numbers of the scripts, they've kind of been jigged around a little bit.
Right.
Episode 5 was episode 7. The episode 5 that we know now was formerly episode 7.
That's the episode where Winters gets some time off and he goes to Paris, isn't it? And sees the kid on the train.
Yes, it is. Episode 8 was formerly episode 11. So they've all kind of been sort of shifted around and a little bit more condensed. But my thoughts on this episode, I think it's I think it's one of the best episodes. The
best episode that never was.
Yeah, it really. I mean, it would have slotted in so well. But one of the things that it does do is it gives us an insight into some of the many unsung heroes of World War II and any war. The Graves registration units, and the work that they do, that these men do. The fact that they have to be very, very detached and very stoical, and very, very matter of fact, very pragmatic people. Um, and But it also gives us a little bit more into, as you said, why Peacock is so despised. Well, not necessarily despised, but disliked. There's kind of a sniffiness about everybody when they talk about Peacock. They just, everyone kind of turns. You can see a slight sort of grimace whenever his name is mentioned. He's like he's a square peg. He's definitely a square peg. But we get the context of that, and he doesn't come out of the episode well at all.
No.
I just wonder whether that was one of the reasons why they decided to kind of ditch the episode. There may have been many reasons, but I think this could have been one of the reasons where they've already kind of come down on Sobel like a ton of bricks. They've already come down on Dyke with a ton, like a ton of bricks. To come down on a third person, could be considered, a little bit too, focused on the men that did wrong rather than the men that did right. Could be. Uh, but Webster comes out of this just beautifully. I think he's a beautifully written character. He's a really
Yeah.
well written character in this episode, and he's got some of the most amazing dialogue. And I have a funny feeling that the majority of that dialogue that they put down in this script comes directly from his diary, because
From
he was a
Webster's
man of,
from Webster's
yeah,
diary.
yeah, because he was a man of words, wasn't he? And
Yeah.
and there's some of the things that he says are so, beautifully written and so articulate. I would suggest that they do come directly from his diary. I do like Owen, though. I do like Owen. I think
Yeah.
he's Lieutenant Owen. I think he's a really good character. Um,
Unfortunately, as a result of this episode being completely rewritten, the storyline of basically the grave digging and the trying to identify a body, that was all dropped. So Lieutenant Owen doesn't appear in the show. I think that's a
mm,
huge shame, because no
it's a
one's ever
great
done
show.
a storyline about a graves diggers unit
Mm,
before in anything.
no,
What I can
no. I mean,
remember.
it's the one side of things that, in any war film, in any mini series, in fact, in any book, I can't recall anything that's been about these men at all. And
Yeah.
what a thankless job they do. Thankless in terms of, at the time. At the time of doing it, it's thankless. It's an arduous job. It's an incredibly stressful job, and you can't imagine the sights that these men have to see, have to be exposed to, let alone their duties of recovering the remains of these people. These poor soldiers that have gone through this.
Yeah, and the link that I've just dropped in the chat is actually for it's a little article for the 605th Graves Registration Company at Son.
Right, right,
And,
right. Okay,
there's a little bit of information
that's
there,
interesting.
and it's talking about how they came to select the location for the cemetery for 20 American
Yeah.
soldiers ready for burial, and the site was ultimately selected by Second Lieutenant Lieutenant William F. Coughlin, which is a name I definitely remember reading from somewhere else. And I think ultimately there were 80 soldiers of the 101st were buried there. But by the 5th of October, the cemetery was closed for further burial. So that cemetery, I believe, is still there. I think I went there. It's a while now. I'm pretty sure
Yeah.
that's one.
But what an incredible job these men have done. I mean, obviously we have to pay tribute to every member of the services, Air Force, Army, and Navy, of course, but all aspects, all branches of those services, those service personnel, you know, um, that had such an arduous job to do, a terrible, terrible job to do. And this is a side of the fence we just never get to see. It would have been an interesting episode. However, it's not necessarily about Easy Company per se. And I think
we get
this
to learn a
is
bit more about some of the key men, especially Webster, Peacock. There's a bit of fleshing out of some of the other characters. Spears is in it again. He's his usual self. I mean, one of the things I did really, really feel when I read the script was, man, I can hear the characters. I mean, because I know them so well already. I mean, obviously that's a bit of a bias, but you know, you really kind of they jumped off the page. Apart from I think Raider, who I wasn't sure who that was. Maybe that's a character that got written out. Yeah, my thoughts are that this could have easily been an episode 5 with sort of extended or different perspectives of the battle that we'd already seen in episode 4. It could have easily slotted in. I think it's a great shame it got taken out. The episode that we end up with was definitely more kind of traditional and more gripping, and still is a very good episode. And we'll talk about replacements next week. But yeah, it is a bit of a shame, and it's interesting to hear that the show was supposed to be 13 episodes, because this would have been a great one of those 13 for sure, in my view. Fantastic writing by
it's
Graham Yost.
just it really is. It's I mean, I've read a few of these scripts, and it's one of the best. I think I really do think it's one of the best.
So Blue, you're the American in the house, and we're going to have another one on shortly.
Yeah.
Let us know your thoughts.
That's a lot to unpack. I think, like you guys were saying, it's like, especially hearing about just, you know, things people don't think about, you know, like in war, like you guys are saying, a tank blows up, the poor guys, someone's got to clean that shit up. It's simple as that. And how many people, those are things you don't talk about. Those are like, and like Lance was saying, details. I mean, because it does happen, and I know our friend Toxic will come in about military. Sometimes military makes mistakes, and the worst thing you want to have is a mother or a father or a sister, anybody, and you get that knock on the door, and like, here's a letter, your son's been killed, and it destroys your whole world. And 2 months later, hey, your kid's actually alive. Oh man, who messed up on that? But I think I wouldn't say my criticism. My only, I guess, observation is maybe why this wasn't made for is that the writing is fantastic as the entire series, but maybe too many flashbacks. Because I mean, I know Lance joked at one point, it's like, well, like 19 flashbacks or something. And for an audience member, constantly going back and forth between flashbacks may like turn like two flashbacks are okay, but too many episodes.
That was a bit of a criticism of mine. I was thinking when I was writing out the storyline, and of course I read it twice in detail. That's why I started numbering the flashbacks. I was like, how many of these are there? And I think I got to I think we were nearly on flashback 20 by the end.
That's a lot in one episode.
So the narrative did jump around a lot. I don't think that would have been a problem if this had followed episode 4, because we would have been very familiar with what had happened already in Noonan. Now we're getting these kind of different perspectives and hearing different versions from different soldiers. That was another thing I liked about this script, is they explored that again, which I think is covered in a different episode, where one man tells you something and actually somebody else says, hang on a minute, no, it was like this. Oh yeah, I was wrong. And it just shows
so they kind of rush him on.
So that's what I was gonna. That's what I was gonna say. It's kind of a Rashomon type episode.
Welcome, Lord Toxic. I'm glad that you've got your
thank you for having me
activated.
It's great. It's honestly, it's great to have you here, to hear your kind of take on what we've been talking about.
Lord Toxic, just before you offer your view on it, and I know you've been listening in, could you, to the extent that you can mention it or feel comfortable to do so, could you just let our viewers know a bit about your military history?
I joined the Army in 2000, late 2000. I was a delayed entry. I had to get a waiver for my my sordid felony career as a juvenile. And once I got the waiver, I went in early 2001, graduated boot camp, and arrived at my first duty station in Leavenworth in September 5th of 2001, right before 9/11, and was assigned to QRF as a military policeman. Later worked at the disciplinary barracks, or the castle, and got in a bit of trouble as an MP. And as a punishment, I was demoted and sent to the 82nd Airborne.
Wow.
at the age of 35, which is almost unheard of because
I thought
yeah.
MPs were supposed to be the people that were keeping a lid on the trouble, but you.
Well, Lance, I don't know what to tell you. I just, it's hard to change, I guess. But yeah, no, I got in a bit of trouble, and my colonel couldn't kick me out of the military, but he could bust me down and sent me to the airborne, where he was hoping that I would be drummed out. Unfortunately for him, I decided to get in really good shape, and I became a paratrooper, and then went to Iraq for a few years, came back, finished out my career in the reserves as an MP again, but with paratrooper stripes. And
Nice.
that's basically it. I was a
There you
replacement.
go, 82nd All American.
Oh wow.
That's right.
So
That's
yeah, give us
really
your
impressive.
you're a big fan of the series.
I
which
am,
is, which is great. And
in the book.
do come on when we do the last episode, episode 10. I actually want to have quite a big panel on that one, so do come on that one as well.
If I can, I will.
If you're available. But yeah, so I went through the script in some detail. You were listening in. What are your thoughts about the episode? Tell us.
This is really an eye-opener. I had no idea. I thought, with having read the book and watched the series multiple times, I would have known this. Had you not come up with this, I don't think this is definitely not common knowledge. I've never heard of this. And I definitely agree with Inside Man that it's very Rashomon type. I would have been really intrigued to see this, but I can see why they why they derailed it or didn't make it. I can see that with the flow of the miniseries, they probably thought, a Graves registration, a detective story almost would have maybe derailed the momentum a little bit. So I could kind of see, but I would have been really intrigued to have seen that episode done. And I don't know anything about Graves registration. I also agree. I've never seen anything like that in media. I've never read anything about it. We had a private company that would do that in Iraq for us. And thank God for that, because I can't even imagine the toll that must take on service members to have to do that, especially back then. But they didn't have the luxury of private companies back then. So yeah, it's fascinating.
Okay. Well, it's interesting to get your viewpoint on that. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to hear that there were 13 episodes planned originally. When the production started, Inside Man, was that still the case, or at what point was there an announcement in production? No, we're only doing 10.
When I was on episode 1, as far as we were concerned, it was 13 episodes still. And I think when we got to episode 2, then it had been reduced. That's what I can remember. I might be misremembering, because it's nearly a quarter of a century ago that we started. But
wow.
Yeah. So yeah, it's hard to believe, isn't it?
Were you still contracted for the same amount of shooting time, or was it reduced when the number of episodes reduced?
Well, it's funny because as I said, we shot episode 1 twice. So episode 1 had been shot twice. So in effect, that really could have been one of the reasons why it was reduced from 13 episodes to 10.
Because of the expense of having to refilm,
the expense of reshooting episode 1. That
because they reshot
thinking about it now.
Yeah,
thinking about it now, having shot, I'd say 90% of what you see in episode 1, the episode 1 that we all know, 90% of that was, if you only 10% of what we shot for the original first episode actually made it into the first episode that was aired. So 90% of the first episode, was completely reshot.
What was the 10% of episode 1 that still was in the episode 1 that we saw?
A few bits and pieces with Winters and Sobel, certainly the lineup at the beginning, little bits and pieces on the airfield. There's a lot more on the airfield in the in the episode 1 that I've got. We have massively extended training sequences, massively extended drop sequences. Loads of interaction between Nixon and Winters. The beginning actually, I think, is quite beautiful, because it's done with Winters sending letters. So it is kind of reading letters to home, letters that he's written to his wife. So the whole beginning is totally different. Most of what we see is Winters sort of wandering around a pottery, and you're hearing these voiceovers of him, in these letters. But yeah, loads more sort of aerial stuff. Drops, a few deaths in training. Yeah, there's quite a lot. Oh, and of course, massively, the drumming out sequence, which is in the book.
Yeah.
Um, and it was actually shot very, very, very accurately to the book. The kind of disdain and hatred that everyone
Yeah.
had towards the photographers that were
Yeah.
snapping away as the guys were having their trousers unbloused, and their wings ripped off their uniforms and everything. That was done really, really well. But it's a good episode.
Why do you
It's
think they cut that scene out?
kind of slows it down, maybe slows down the pace of getting from A to B to C to D.
I would
Is it
guess
is
probably
it a bit of a negative image?
it's definitely a negative image. If you've ever seen Lords of Discipline, they have a drumming out scene there that's really hard to watch. And if you
Yeah.
read the book, the guy that gets drummed out, he after he gets drummed out, he just continues walking and just walks in front of a train
Yeah.
because of the disgrace.
Yeah.
And that was definitely something. They don't really do that much today. I think sometime around the mid 2000s, they started to see that as hazing, or a form of hazing.
Yeah.
But they did used to do. I had my stripes ripped off me in a formation. So we used to have a saying, you're not a real sergeant until you made it twice. So, but as far as the whole thing, I remember reading that and just my blood boiled at the thought of
Yeah.
some douche waffle going in and taking pictures of a guy getting his airborne. And the reason for a lot of these were, okay, some of it was fighting, and some of it was winding up in the stockade or something like that. But a lot of it was just orders got changed and people came back late to formations, and just a guy being late because of the train system. Some guy
That's
coming back
right.
from Iowa.
That's
Yeah.
That's right. That was it, wasn't it? Wasn't they coming back from Christmas or something? The
Yes.
Christmas furlough
Yeah.
or something?
Yeah.
And the train services weren't running as
Nope.
they would normally run if it
Right.
wasn't the holiday season.
Yeah. And that
Yeah.
was no fault of the troopers, and they just decided to, some arrogant colonel or general wanted to make an example and get these guys drummed out for being late, or technically AWOL. But I mean, so
How many of them were drummed out?
I couldn't say. It's been so long since I read the book. Probably not that many. I mean, I would
I think
imagine
it was about 4. I think 4, possibly 6.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm just thinking more in the
Some-
sequence that was filmed inside Man that you've seen.
Do you know? I mean, it's so long since I've put it in the video machine.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
What you have to remember is when you
Sorry.
just go. Oh, I'm sorry. When you just go through basic training, it's a huge expense on a person. Add to that, remember these guys were in training for 2 years before they actually saw combat. That's an extreme expenditure. So just drumming people out for being late to formation, that's I mean, you really got to look at that. There was a thing going on in 2007 where we had a commander at my unit was drumming people out for not meeting the body weight standards, even if their PT standards were okay. And he actually got a letter of reprimand from the general. Was like, listen, do you not realize we're fighting a war in 2 different countries, and you're getting rid of soldiers, that are experienced operators? Like, this is ridiculous. So, but yeah, I mean, it's something that can be done. It's definitely frowned upon. I can't even imagine what that must have been like back then. I mean, that must have been, you train with these guys for 2 years, you get your stripes, you get your patches, and you get drummed out because your train is late. That's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, the episode is. I can remember the episode being slightly longer. I mean, you have to forgive me because I haven't, like I say, I haven't watched it for quite some time, and I want to make sure the next time I watch it that I've got it in a good video machine that's gonna play the tape, and
Well,
not
as
chew the
opposed to
fucking
like
thing
a Betamax or something.
Yeah.
Still got them.
And but it's yeah, so I think there was possibly 4 that were drummed out in the show that I can recall. Bearing in mind that I was actually there on the parade ground when the whole thing was being done anyway. But I just can't remember how many there were. I cannot remember. So, but it's a great episode.
That is the episode 4 that never was. Personal effects. Great story idea. I can see why it was ultimately changed. I think if they'd made it episode 5 and kept episode 4 as it was, I think it would have worked fine. Would have, but I think if this came in and you didn't have what you had in the episode 4 we've now got, it probably would have jarred a little bit.
Yeah.
Especially because it mainly revolves around a character we haven't met before, the Lieutenant Owens, and we're not really emotionally invested in him, even though his job's super important. But I do think there was a missed opportunity here because now, as we said earlier, no one's ever done the perspective on what it's like to work in one of those units, and it's it's kind of a bit of an unsung job, really, isn't it?
Very much.
Not really talked about. So
I'd make a great short story sometime, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, somebody should go and make a movie about it. The 2 Millers that were killed, that are mentioned in the original episode 4 script, these were all real people. Both Millers did die at Noonan. Again, I've put some information in the chat up about them already. So if you want to read up more about them and what happened to them, you can. So a shorter episode than normal because, of course, we covered a script that hasn't actually been made, so we can't have much more comment about it. Curious to know if anyone's been watching since the beginning and you heard the breakdown of the story. Curious to know what your thoughts were on it. Put those comments in the chat now. Did you like the sound of it? Do you have a view on it? If so, please comment. While people are doing that, we're going to be back probably on Sunday. Probably on Sunday, doing the actual episode 4, our breakdown. Inside Man, will we have some behind-the-scenes stills for that?
Yeah, I've got plenty for that. Yeah, got quite a few for that one.
So we will have some behind-the-scene stills of how they shot the actual episode 4 replacements. And we'll get into that next week. Probably be Sunday at 8:00. Sometimes we've done these on Saturday. It all just depends on availability of people. We were going to have the Critical Drinker and History Bro on, but unfortunately, because we had to change things around, they couldn't make it today. History Bro should be back with us next week for sure. Maybe we'll get Drinker as well. He has a very busy schedule, but he's certainly keen. So we are going to be back tomorrow night with the latest episode of the Nielsen ratings. Lots to talk about, especially the new episode of South Park. Which is an excellent riff on Mad Max 2. You really need to have seen Mad Max 2 to get all the jokes. But it's a brilliant episode. Doesn't pull any punches. Talking about the drugs everybody's using for slimming and so forth. And stops people from eating, and it's all kind of very unhealthy. And then there's also quite a few series to talk about. I've seen a couple of documentaries on Netflix, so we'll get into those. But mainly we'll be talking about stuff that we've seen that we think is good, that we think might interest our viewers, stuff that we want to recommend to you. I'm less interested in spending time whinging about shit that we don't like. If we do, we keep that pretty short, and then we move on. So that's Tuesday. I've got an industry interview this Friday with director of photography Simon Rowling. He's been a DOP, part of the kind of new wave digital indie film scene in London. I first met him. He was the DOP on the Predator fan film, which is directed by my good friend James Boosh. And Jimmy Boosh, as I call him, should also be coming on for an interview, I think, in the second week of June. So I've got 2 more industry interviews lined up already. And the IMDb page for Simon Rowling, who's coming on Friday, I will just drop that in the chat now. And yes, James McAvoy was in Shameless. That's right. That was kind of the show that made him a bit of a star. Yeah. So Blue, what else you got coming up, mate? Do you want to plug anything?
Tomorrow, me and Toxic, and we're finishing out our Western month.
Oh, you're doing The Quick and the Dead tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
I love that movie. So good. Especially the scene where Lance Henriksen gets taken out.
Yeah.
That's just a brilliant, like, he's all mouth kind of thing. It's so good.
Yeah, we're doing that. And of course, the Nielsen ratings. And then Pumpkin Man's going to be doing the Tarzan, the Disney Tarzan.
Right.
So that's going to be interesting.
Oh, as in Gord King / Michael.
Yeah.
Sarah.
Pumpkin
Excellent. Man. Fantastic. Tox, have you got anything you want to plug?
Yeah. So Blue Collar and I are also doing the Crow re-release at the end of the month on the 29th. I think
it's actually in 2 days, Wednesday.
For his
is that the Crow reboot?
No,
it's the 30th anniversary.
Oh, of the Brandon Lee one.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
For his low bar TV or special, we jump out of the theater and talk about movies that are actually in theater. And I am working on a new series just for my own channel, just by myself, called Consider the Source, which I will take books that have been turned into movies or TV shows and compare the two and find out which one is better.
Great idea.
Thanks.
What a great idea.
What books have you got coming up?
So I'm gonna go in easy. I want to take it easy on the first one and just do a simple one. It's gonna be Firestarter by Stephen King. I will not be talking about the 2022 abomination, but the 84 Drew Barrymore one.
I quite like that movie. The
22 one? Really?
No, God no. The 84.
Oh, okay. Oh yeah, the 84 one. Yeah, I grew up with it and read the book, and it's one of the. I think I picked it because it's not only is it easy, but it's one of the first ones that I remember going, oh, okay, so I've seen this movie. Let me read this book when I was a young Toxic, and I thought it was interesting. I didn't want to go heavy with like No Country for Old Men at first or whatever. So yeah.
But what a one to go for, though. No Country for Old Men.
I did a college paper on that, actually.
Oh, did you?
I did.
Wow.
I did. Got a B. I think I got a B+ on it, actually.
Yeah.
Well, that is certainly a film with a lot of metaphors and themes about the end of life, and
indeed,
it's people could certainly delve into that. That would be a good one to get into when you've done some of the easier.
And the book's great. The book is amazing. One of the great pieces of American literature, I think.
I agree. 100%.
Fantastic. Inside Man, anything you wanted to mention?
Yeah, I've got this Limited Diet stream coming up with Northern English Bastarded, and I think he's trying to lock down a date for the Tomb Raider, the 2001 Tomb Raider, which is another movie that I've worked on with Angelina. We go way back.
Hell yeah, that's prime Angelina.
Was that the first one that Noah Taylor played her sidekick? Is that the one you're talking about?
I think that's
Noah Taylor, the short Australian actor, kind of played like her techie sidekick.
No, no, her sidekick in this one was this British guy.
Well, Noah Taylor may well have done a British accent.
I don't think so.
Hang on, I'll show you who Noah Taylor is.
It's the first one's definitely the Daniel Craig one. I remember that.
Daniel Craig, yeah.
Which was Angelina Jolie playing British and Daniel Craig playing American, which is
Yeah,
And the
that's
funny
right.
part
Yeah.
is John Voight's her father in the
Yeah.
movie too.
This is the
Yes.
guy who
Yeah,
played her sidekick, and I'm sure in at least one movie, maybe more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Doesn't
like
he
a
also
tech-
play he plays the
Sorry.
techie guy in Edge of Tomorrow too, doesn't he? For Emily Blunt's character?
Yes, I think you're right. I think he was in that.
Hmm.
I'll just check his credits.
Yeah.
Actually, I've met him
Typecast.
because his cousin was in a play that I directed,
Okay.
and he came to see it, and I got to sit and chat with him for about an hour. And very, very, very interesting guy.
Almost
I've
famous.
followed his career from quite early on, so I was very, very familiar with his work. I forgot he was in Vanilla Sky.
I did too.
But he's got like such a diverse like acting portfolio.
Yep, there it is.
There he
was
is. Yeah,
Edge of Tomorrow. Yep.
yeah. He's a phenomenal actor. He hates interviews, so even though I've got direct access to him, I don't think I'd ever convince him to come on. But
That's a shame.
yeah, but he's a great actor though. All right, well, with that, remains for us to say thanks very much for tuning in. Slightly unusual episode, but I thought it was definitely warranted discussion.
Absolutely.
And better to give it
Yeah.
its own stream away from the actual episode, which we'll get into next week. So that's it from us. Thanks to my panel for coming on, my usual cohorts, Blue Collar Loser and Inside Man, and thanks for Lord of Toxicity popping in with his vast military knowledge to give a certain sheen to this particular stream. Thanks everyone in the chat for your comments and so forth. I will be auctioning off a Band of Brothers Day of Days screenplay, production screenplay at some point to pay for my gas and electric bill. So I'll be telling you more about that on the next stream. I haven't quite decided when and how it's going to happen yet. But yes, so if you're interested in that unique gift, do let us know. Until then, that's it from us. We'll catch up with you again tomorrow night at 10 o'clock. And of course, next week, probably on Sunday at 8 p.m.